feeling like sunshine, like springtime, like something's in the water and I'm taking a deep dive. I'm feeling so weightless, like I'm gonna make it, and nothing in the universe can take this. I can see it clearly now, nothing gonna bring me down. I got my head held high, I'm on my way, and I'm following the signs to my happy place. I'm walking in the light of a brand new day, and I'm right where I belong in my happy place. I got my head held high, I'm on my way, and I'm following the signs to my happy place. I'm walking in the light of a brand new day, and I'm right where I belong in my happy place. And I'm right where I belong in my happy place. And I'm right where I belong in my happy place.
Welcome to the National University of Singapore Yong Lo Ling School of Medicine Healthy Longevity webinar. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'd like to remind all of you that you can use the question and answer function to send us questions that we will then address after the talk. So tonight we have Professor Kenneth Meijer with us, who will speak about the neuromechanical principles of balance and innovative ways to use these principles to prevent falls in the elderly. But first, I would like to welcome Wang Chengyung, a PhD student in my research group at the University Healthy Longevity Center, who will present on his own project on GLP-1 agonists as potential promoters of healthy longevity. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your introduction. As mentioned, this is Qingyun from Young Gruber's lab. I'm a PhD student. Today, I'm going to introduce GLP-1 receptor agonist, a potential promoter of healthy longevity. The pursuit of longevity and the mitigation of age-related diseases have driven significant research into therapeutics that can extend lifespan and improve healthy span. FDA-approved drugs such as the mTOR inhibitor, ripamycin, and the diabetes controller metformin are regarded as the most effective anti-aging drugs. However, severe side effects limit their effectiveness in clinical trials. Recent studies suggest that GLP-1 receptor agonists, which is GLP-1 RAAs, was originally developed for the treatment of type 2 diabetes, may also have potential as anti-aging tools, offering benefits beyond glycemic control by addressing key mechanisms involved in aging and related diseases. GLP-1, or glucagon-like peptide 1, regulates blood glucose and appetite through multiple mechanisms. When we eat, GLP-1 is released from a small intestine and stimulates the pancreas to secrete insulin, which in turn helps lower blood glucose, and it also inhibits glucagon secretion, which prevents the liver from releasing excess glucose into bloodstream. GLP-1 acts on the brain to reduce appetite and increase the sensation of fullness, helping control food intake. Additionally, it slows down the emptying of stomach, leading to gradual nutrient absorption and a stable blood glucose level. Besides, GLP-1 receptor agonists improve multiple organs' function, including heart, liver, and brain, by mimicking endogenous GLP-1. Next, I will present the research progress on GLP-1 receptor agonists in anti-aging and their potential to improve aging-related diseases, from preclinical studies to clinical trials. This year, a paper published on BioCov confirmed that exenatide, one of a GLP-1 receptor agonist, given to 11-month-old aging mice, does not affect blood glucose, body weight, or food intake, but can improve grip strength and cognition functions significantly. What's more, weekly injection of GLP-1 receptor agonist for 3 months can significantly extend the lifespan and improve behavioral performance of the PLA2G6 mutant mouse, which is a model for adult neurodegenerative diseases, often leading to shortened lifespan and decreased behavioral and cognition abilities. Inflammation is considered one of the hallmarks of aging and is involved in its occurrence and development. Recent studies have shown that GLP-1 receptor agonist inhibits systematic inflammation by affecting central neuron cells. Although the authors did not investigate its impact on aging, we can indirectly understand its anti-aging potential. As an already approved clinical drug, GLP-1 receptor agonists have also shown outstanding performance in clinical trials. Previous studies have demonstrated that GLP-1 receptor agonists can significantly reduce all-cause mortalities in fat populations, including deaths caused by severe cardiovascular disease. Additionally, clinical trial studies have confirmed that GLP-1 receptor agonists are effective for aging-related diseases, including osteoarthritis, Parkinson's disease, and NASH. In conclusion, a amount of studies have already confirmed the potential of GLP-1 receptor agonists in delaying aging and improving aging-related diseases. However, their mechanisms of acting may not simply involve in the activation of GLP-1 receptor. Further research will help us better understand how they combat aging and facilitate clinical translations. That's all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we're honored to have with us Professor Kenneth Meijer. Professor Meijer is a professor of human movement science at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. He's an expert on human movement sciences, focusing on the neuromechanical principles of movement with the aim of developing innovative treatment for movement-related disorders. He coordinates the Maastricht Movement Research Network, fostering transdisciplinary collaborative work among clinicians, engineers, behavioral scientists, and from what I saw, AI and data scientists. Sounds very exciting. Professor Meijer works on wearable technology, computational and AI tools to understand neuromechanical principles of movement and physical performance. These tools can obviously be used to improve performance, but he will share with us today that they can also be used to diagnose deficits and prevent injuries. The title of his talk today is Stumbling to Improve Balance, and I'm excited to learn more about these new technologies and algorithms and science and how they can prevent falls and facilitate healthy old age. Welcome, Professor Meijer.
Thanks a lot, Jan, for the kind introduction, and also thanks a lot to NUS for inviting me to present some of our work. Yeah, I don't have to highlight all the affiliations. Sorry for making you stumble, Jan, on this. Or at least the university and the medical center that I work at is located in Maastricht in the Netherlands. We consider ourselves to be the heart of Europe. And Maastricht, you might know from the place where the European Treaty was signed in 1992, quite a while ago. This picture nicely represents the entrance of our hospital, and this is where I think we consider ourselves fortunate. So I'm working at the university, but we're closely aligned with the hospital. So we have nice translational research lines, and one of them I would like to talk about today. The title of my talk is Stumbling to Improve Balance. And stumbling refers to maybe, well, all the trials and errors that we made, figuring out which mechanisms make people prone to falling and which mechanisms might help prevent people from falling. It also refers to the fact, and that's maybe my key take-home message for today, that we should challenge our balance to improve our balance. And I hope to give you some insights into this. I'd like to acknowledge our Human Movement Sciences team, which is a nice collection of young, brilliant researchers working on a variety of disciplines, which is very rewarding because our hospital is in the transition from a cure center to a care center, meaning that we also adopt lifestyle interventions to really care for the health and hopefully also promote longevity in our population. Today, I will mostly talk about research that I conducted in collaboration with Dr. Chris McCrum on balance and falls and neuromechanics. And I consider ourselves quite fortunate in Maastricht. We have state-of-the-art facilities in motion labs. So we have what we call a flight simulator for human walking, which I'll allude to a little bit later on. It's called the Karen system. We have world-renowned metabolic rooms where people can stay for longer times while we measure their metabolic activity in response to all sorts of interventions. And we're also involved in the development and application of wearable technology to better understand human movement in daily life and how that relates to health. In essence, our group focuses on two aspects of human movement. First of all, we try to understand human movement. Which mechanisms make that we can balance ourselves even under severe challenges, like walking a tightrope, or how we can prevent fatigue when we have to run the marathon, for instance. The other part of our research focuses on the biology of physical inactivity, and that relates to how can we use human movement, how can we use physical activity to promote health? What is the optimal activity program, physical intervention program for a certain population to achieve certain health goals? But today I will mostly focus on balance and falls in the neuromechanics and energetics of human movement. And while I was preparing this talk, I also searched for links between falls and longevity, and I came across this recent paper in the Lancet Healthy Longevity journal. And it requires a bit of explanation, but you see the bar here going from green to blue, and it relates to fall-related mortality per 100,000 people. You see that it's data from 1990 all the way up to 2021. And what this paper showed was that there is a substantial increase in fall-related deaths over that period. And it also showed that this is, well, partly attributable to the fact that simply the population gets larger, but also age-related factors are involved and all sorts of chronic disorders are involved. It discerns men and women, and it gives you 4 different age categories. And what you see is that in 1990, the blue category will lay somewhere between 75 and 84 years, meaning that most people experienced fall-related deaths, or fall-related deaths were most prominent in that age category, and less so in people 85 years and older. Now, over time, you see that blue color shifts 1 bin and moves to the 85 years and older category, meaning that it's especially the really old people that experience fall-related deaths. Now, you can see this as a positive sign in the sense that due to all sorts of mechanisms, we fall maybe at a later stage in life, and the consequences of the fall, eventually leading to death, are also postponed to later stages in life. However, it also shows that even with all the with these improvements, falls seem still to be an inevitable endpoint for many people. And this is something that we like to tackle and like to better understand. So we know from epidemiology that in falls among elderly adults over 65 years of age, 1 in 3 persons falls annually. Over 80 years of age, it's actually 1 in 2 persons that fall annually. So you can see this is a big health problem and issue. And also in the Netherlands, where I reside, we see an increase in the number of accidental or deaths due to accidental falls per 1,000 inhabitants. So it's roughly 5 to 7 persons per 1,000 inhabitants that die from an accidental fall, which comes with major impact on the healthcare system. So roughly every 4 minutes, someone visits an ER due to a fall. We have over 80,000 serious injuries annually in the Netherlands, many hospital stays, ultimately leading to close to 5,000 fall-related deaths, which is, of course, something you would like to avoid. And I'm not a health economist, but a total healthcare cost of an estimated 1.6 billion seems something that's worthwhile to study. And being a human movement scientist, our approach is, can we understand how we maintain balance, and can we understand which factors might debilitate our ability to maintain balance, and learn from those mechanisms to then subsequently devise interventions that prevent falls in the future. And for that purpose, it's important to at least have some of the basic understanding on the underlying mechanics and neuromechanics. And in principle, it's quite simple. If you consider a person standing, then you're standing on two legs, and standing on two legs is inherently unstable. Consider a chair built of two legs that will typically fall over. And what we're trying to do continuously is to keep our center of mass, which is the red point here, just above our belly button, within our base of support. And this is where our feet touch the ground. And by the force underneath our feet, we can steer that center of mass and thereby control the position of the center of mass. And that's one mechanism in which we maintain our balance. If we get large perturbations, we might also sort of reach out with a hand or change our posture. In that case, we're actually manipulating our center of mass, so the red point. And that's another way to maintain our balance. And the third way is to actually use an external force. So if you have a walking cane and you put the walking cane on the floor, that's an external force, and that helps in your balance. And these are three mechanisms that we can as humans can exploit to stay upright on two legs. Now, this was mostly on standing balance. If we walk, it becomes slightly more difficult, but in essence, the same principles apply. We still have to keep our center of mass nicely aligned with our base of support, and we can have stepping strategies to redirect that center of mass to maintain a stable posture. And to coordinate those activities, we have a variety of mechanisms in our body. So we have the proprioceptus and muscles contributing to balance by providing stiffness and forces and actually sensing the changes of desired trajectories. We have a variety of motor programs in our cerebellum and spinal cord. We have the vestibular system that can sense change of position in the head and respond adequately with vestibular reflexes. And of course, we have our vision. Now, the nice thing of having this modular setup is that, first of all, if one system fails, others might compensate. And you can also see from this graph below that they operate at different bandwidths. So for very fast corrections, you typically use your proprioceptus or your muscles. For slower responses, you can use your vision, and it's also clear that there is an overlap in the bandwidth. So if, for instance, the vestibular system fails, vision and the cerebellar programs might partially compensate for that loss. And what we're doing in our department is we're trying to understand these mechanisms, and we can understand these mechanisms from very specific experiments on healthy subjects. But one of the benefits of working closely with clinicians is that we also have access to populations where balance is a primary problem. And one of those groups are people with benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, which is a deficit that's typically underdiagnosed. So it is quite prevalent in elderly subjects. And what happens there is that the crystals that are present in the otolith organs of your vestibular system, they get loose and they end up in the semicircular canals also of the vestibular system, creating the sense of motion while you actually are not moving. And typically when this happens, it causes dizziness. Think of standing on a ship on a bumpy sea. But it also creates a loss of balance. So one of our PhD students, Sarah Powells, wanted to study whether this particular problem led to balance problems, and also understand what type of balance problems people experience when they have a very specific sensory loss, namely the vestibular system. So she made this nice diagram where she looked at stability in gait, biomechanical factors, sensory orientation, verticality and limits of stability, the role of transitions and anticipatory postural adjustments, and reactive postural responses. And she started out with a systematic literature review, and the initial results are presented essentially in the same flower diagram. What's shown here is that in green studies that show a significant difference between either BPPV versus controls, so BPPV having a worse balance than controls, or pre versus post-treatment, where the post-treatment then has a better performance versus the pre-treatment. What became clear is that indeed a variety of aspects of postural control are affected by BPPV. Typically, people studied sensory orientation or verticality, so we see a large gap in the literature in stability in gait, reactive postural responses, transitions of responses. And she also found that repositioning maneuvers, so this is one of the interventions in BPPV, trained physicians can basically make head movements that redirect the crystals back to the otolith organs where they're supposed to reside. And indeed, if you do this, you get an improvement in balance control. And the open question we have here is whether this also leads to a reduced risk of falls, because it's known in BPPV that they have a higher number of falls. And maybe alleviate also the fear of falling, which is also one of the symptoms that these patients undergo. Sarah set out to do a randomized controlled trial, and this morning I checked the latest results, and indeed it's clear that BPPV patients have higher risk of falls, and that the repositioning improves balance, but also seems to improve falls to a certain extent. And we hope to share the official results with you as soon as possible. So there is some promise there. We also study more serious cases of vestibular loss, namely bilateral vestibulopathy, meaning that both balance organs, you have two on the left and the right side, are affected. And these patients, that's quite a serious condition leading to reduced physical activity, continuous nausea. So these patients really suffer from those symptoms, and that's why Maastricht University and University Medical Center set out to do the Vertigo study together with the Geneva Research Institute and the company Medel to develop basically a vestibular implant based on a cochlear implant that might alleviate those symptoms. And our group is responsible for first of all, checking whether these patients indeed have balance problems, which if you look at them is quite obvious, but we want to characterize this. And at a later stage, also see if the vestibular implant then will relieve the balance problems. And here you see initial data by Maiqian Su, one of our PhD students, also recently published. It shows the results on the mini-best test score, which is a balance test that addresses the various components of postural balance control over different age categories. And you clearly see that the PVVP patients, or the BVP patients, I should say, perform poorly or more poorly than healthy controls. It's also clear that some patients might perform as good as healthy controls, whereas other patients have a really poor balance. So the best score you can get is 28, the lowest score is 0, and you see that indeed some of these patients end up with scores of 0. So clearly, such a serious case of vestibulopathy leads to balance problems. We also asked the question whether, because we monitored falls history in these patients, whether the patients that did not experience falls had better scores or worse scores. Well, had better scores, that's just what you anticipate, than patients with a false history, but we could not find any association there. Now, this might be for various reasons. It might be that problems in balance control, postural balance control, do not directly relate to falls, and this is one of our active lines of research. The other thing we have to account for is the fact that these patients compensate for their symptoms. If you have severe vestibulopathy, severe balance control, you might end up in a lifestyle that you don't get out at all. So you're not walking, you're not walking through the grocery store, and therefore you expose yourself less to situations where you might fall. And this is something that we try to address in another population, a group of osteoporosis patients that already experienced a fracture via our fracture liaison service. And the idea there is that there might be a relationship between the capacity that you have, the physical capacity, are you a good walker or a poor walker, for instance, and the exposure that you get to a risky environment. So how active are you in daily life? For that purpose, we had those 400 patients conduct a 6-minute walk test, which you see on the x-axis here. We also monitored their daily physical activities and expressed that as activity minutes per day. And then we categorized them into 4 different categories, where we have people that have high physical capacity and also do a lot of physical activity in daily life. But we also have people with a low physical capacity and still doing a lot of daily physical activities. And you might hypothesize that this is the group that has low capacity, but a large exposure, and therefore might be more prone to falls. The nice thing about this study is that we started it a couple of years ago. We're now into the 6-year follow-up. So we could do nice prospective analyses. And it turned out that none of these categories were linked to time to fracture, fall, or death in this 6-year follow-up study, which was, well, kind of disappointing or unexpected for us. Maybe good for the patients, although 50% of those patients experienced in that 6-year period a fall, so they're still prone to falling. And it made us conclude that this particular framework might be insufficient to study the complex multifactorial process of falls, and that we might need a more personal approach. That was sort of the doctor's reasoning and thinking about the patient and all the factors involved in daily life. From a human movement science perspective, you can also ask the question, are we looking at the right parameters? Because doing a 6-minute walk test essentially involves walking straight ahead on a flat surface, no challenges or whatever. So how relevant is that for falls? And that leads us to, I think, the main topic or the message that I want to get across is that most falls occur due to trips and slips while walking. It's been well known already since the 60s, and a lot of data has been accumulating that worldwide, and it's a pretty consistent number, roughly 60% of all falls are due to trips and slips. So maybe we should study the trips and the slips, and maybe we should train the people in becoming better at tripping and slipping to make the appropriate recovery. And that has led us to the idea of perturbation-based balance training. And our first steps there we took with Chris McCrum, who was at that time a PhD student and currently is one of our assistant professors. And for perturbation-based balance training, you basically have 2 criteria. Essentially, it means that you impose perturbations on a subject walking, and that perturbation should be large enough that it should elicit a sudden motor response. And the second criterion is that that motor response should be so large that it requires some sort of action to maintain stability. Now, we're not the only ones working on this. There's many groups in the world currently working on this. And one of the reasons is that this type of training, at least from some studies, might be better than the typical strength training, balance training, functional exercise training that is currently prescribed if people are prone to falls. Because those types of training can lead to fall reductions of 20, maybe up to 39%. And with a lot of effort involved on the side of the subject, it seems that this reactive balance training can lead up to 50% falls reduction, or at least that's what the initial studies indicate. and with a less intensive training program. Because the whole beauty of perturbation-based training is that it's sort of reactivating a memory that we have, or triggering the right motor program that is somewhere embedded but we have not been using in the past. That makes it a very effective and fast approach. So we've done a number of studies in the past. I'm just going to quickly go over the key findings. We found that healthy populations can rapidly improve their reactive gait recovery with 8 or fewer perturbations in a single session. So basically, we impose perturbations to subjects, and the initial perturbation, they might fall or be seriously perturbed. But you notice that they quickly respond more adequately and actually capturing the perturbation and continue to walk in a normal way. It's also important to know that if you provide such a session, young adults at least show a full retention after 1 month. So with a brief intervention, you can actually have long-lasting effects of 1 month, and some studies say even 1 year. It's also shown that older adults show more improvement, probably because they have a larger initial deficit and therefore have a larger benefit. It's been found that people with neurological and sensory disorders might have more difficulty to adapt to this, probably because they cannot update their motor programs as effectively as healthy subjects. But you can also maybe use this as a marker for increased fall risk. And it seems that the response to perturbation training does not go via a better muscle contraction. So we've done studies looking at muscle fiber typing. We've also studied highly physical active older adults, but they do not necessarily respond better than regularly active adults, suggesting that muscle strength per se is not a key factor in the improvements found in these studies. So we, at some point, were confident enough that we said, okay, we want to study this in a randomized controlled trial. And this was work by Marissa Gerards, a PhD student that got her degree last year. She did the next step study. And here we included 60 community dwelling elderly adults who were prone to falls, and half of them got regular falls training, and the other half got falls training plus perturbation training, which involved them being moved about on our current system in a variety of directions and intentions. And what we found is shown here, again, as the mini-best test scores. So the white boxes are the control group, just received normal care or usual care for falls, and gray shows the PBT group. You can see that they end up quite high on the mini-best score, so they're performing quite well, and that might be one of the deficits or the weaknesses in the study, that we included people that were performing too well on balance. But in essence, we did not find any improvement in balance in older adults with recent falls. And we also did not notice any change in the fear of falling due to the perturbation training, although the patients or the subjects that were included in the perturbation training did acknowledge that they found the training to be nice, rewarding, safe, because they are in a safety harness when we toss them around. But for us, of course, this was a bit disappointing, because we figured we had found the holy grail for falls prevention. And that means that we have to rethink maybe our initial approach. And at the same time, Chris, together with a couple of other leaders in the field, have written this position paper in Frontier Sports and Activity in Living. And it talks about the principles, mechanisms, and implementation in clinical practice of perturbation-based training. And it defined a couple of research priorities. First of all, we don't really know what the optimal perturbation training dose is. If you look at the literature, people take different approaches. There is no real systematic approach like you have in strength training on what kind of perturbations should you give people, how should you increase those perturbations, based on which markers do you define whether there is improvement. It's also noted that there is a variety of ways of applying perturbations, and there is very little study on how these different approaches align. Are they training the same systems? And is there transfer from one method to the other? So I think there's still a lot to be learned there. And from the clinical perspective, currently those perturbation trainings are given by very expensive and bulky equipment, which of course is not cost effective and it's not really feasible in clinical practice. We also have to consider the fact that in the end, this needs to be implemented in clinical practice, and this is something that we should care for. Anxiety is important, and as mentioned, neurological populations might not benefit to the same extent, so we have to identify which populations benefit most. And also having a good dose-response relationship would be beneficial. So that prepped us for a follow-up study on our previous work, which is a current project by Lisette van der Hulst, where we tease out the fall resisting skills in more detail. So we're looking at proactive gait adaptability, where people know that they experience a perturbation and they have time to respond. We will test gait robustness, where people experience a perturbation which is small and which they typically can adopt while continuing to walk. And we will study reactive gait recoveries, where people are perturbed to the extent that they have to take other steps, extra steps, or actually reach out to something to maintain their balance. And we are interested in whether, if you improve in one of these tasks, does that really result in improvements in the other tasks? So to be sure, we investigate the effectiveness and generalizability of task-specific training across different fall-resisting skills in older adults. For that, we use our workhorse, the Karen, which is actually a dual-bell treadmill standing on a motion base, which can move in all sorts of directions while walking in a virtual reality and surround sound environment. And with this, we can give all sorts of perturbations to different sensory systems. And in essence, that's how we currently apply our perturbation methods. But we are also involving systems that are more therapy friendly. So we have the C-mill and the interactive walkway, which are technologies that can actually be located at the physical therapy practice and therefore making the feasibility also better. Briefly, some movies. This is a movie of the proactive gait adaptability. You see the subject sees the object, has time to anticipate, and then makes the appropriate response by crossing the object. Gait robustness involves small differences in speed between the two belts, leading to perturbations that can be covered within one step of the subject. And thirdly, we have the reactive recoveries, where we actually give a large speed difference between the two belts, leading to an acceleration of the center of mass, requiring the subjects to take extra steps. So we're currently in the process of trying to better tease out which components of perturbation-based training work and maybe how to optimize this and how to understand the dose-response relationship. But what we also need are more sensitive outcomes. So what we've used up till now is either falls, which occur quite rarely. I mean, persons over 65 may fall, or 1 out of 3 persons over 65 may fall annually, but given the length of the typical study, that still leads to very few falls. Or we use balance metrics that might not necessarily relate to the fall specific and conditions like tripping and slipping. So as falls happen quite infrequently, fall prevention interventions need huge samples. However, we would argue that near falls occur more often in daily life. I have practical experience there with my parents, and where I see them stumbling around in daily life without really falling. And I always keep thinking, if I could record those stumbles with a stumble meter, that might be a more sensitive metric on how well they're doing than simply the fact that at some point they will fall. We can monitor near falls with falls diaries, but then we suffer from recall bias, and you don't necessarily know what type of balance loss they have endured. And this is why we are also setting up projects to further develop wearable systems to detect and monitor near falls, which we consider to be a big advantage for fall prevention research. We have some prior evidence there, so we've done some work ourselves on mostly algorithms to tease out the fall events from large streams of data. And recently, people have developed better sensors for this and other algorithms. And I'm quite confident that within the next few years, we will have a stumble meter that might serve the purpose for our research. And that leads me to my take-home message for this talk. And for that purpose, I first had that we should challenge our balance to maintain balance. But a better one, I think, was formulated by Chris in a commentary that he has written in the New England Journal of Medicine. And it basically says, we do not expect athletes to win the Olympic medals without practicing the skills of their sports. So why should we expect older adults to fall less often without practicing the skills required for avoiding falls? Essentially meaning that if trips and slips are the largest determinants of falls in daily life, then we should train people to become better at recovering from trips and slips. And this requires equipment with which you can deliver these trips and slips in a safe environment. So maybe fitness centers where there is a safety harness and you are walking on a treadmill that can make all these movements. But we really feel that this might be the game changer to at least reduce the number of falls in the future, and therefore also promote health for people. And that leads me to the final slide, where I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions or remarks.
Thank you, Professor Meijer. So immediately I have one question, which sort of actually two that came up during your presentation. The first one is maybe directly a response to what you just said. So if part of the deficit is due to lack of practice, basically, and less of exposure to slips and fall, like what do you say, trips and slips. I'm thinking about my children. They are, essentially doing all sorts of dangerous and hazardous things all the time. And we keep shouting at them to not climb on things and not like run around looking over their shoulder and stuff like that. And that makes me think that maybe part of the story has to do with adults just not exposing themselves to situations when they're still, in an age where fall would not be as, dangerous. So if you're 40 or 50 and you don't jump and run and do things that, train these systems, then it's been 30, 40 years by the time you're 70 that you last had to deal with a balance problem, possibly. And so one of the questions is from your BPPV vertigo example, how much of this deficit is due to organic issues like damage accumulation in the inner ear, balance organs, and how much is due to 30 years of not using these skills and being essentially avoidant of, situations that might make you stumble or trip or slip?
Yeah, no, a very good question, and something that's of course also on our mind. Indeed, children, I think they fall in their development towards an adult gait pattern. They fall, especially in the first years, maybe 1,000 times a day, and they don't fall from a very large height, and their bones are still more cartilage than bone, so they don't really break things. But in that sense, they are training the motor programs that they need to make walking on two legs stable, which is quite a challenging feat in itself. At later stages, indeed, most of us are confined nowadays to chairs, sedentary lifestyle. We are risk avoiders instead of risk takers. So I think if we get to the stage where we can also include maybe balance measurements more regularly in our daily assessment, because I think currently it's either not done or it's done with metrics that are not really linking to the core problem, namely the conditions under which we fall. we might get a better understanding there. And I definitely think that I don't think that BPPV and bilateral vestibulopathy are essentially driven by inactivity or not using the system. I think that it's more like infectious defects or other mechanisms. But I do have the sense that we are getting less at balance. And the safe way to practice this would be to maybe start running in the forest, because you will have a lot of challenges, but you also have a typically soft floor. I mean, you don't have to hit your head to a tree, but so in the end, it's about exposing yourself to these perturbations, but in a way that if things go wrong, they're not disastrous right away. And I think that's where, or the gym industry should jump on this, but then I think we need a bit more evidence to convince.
Let me follow up on that, because you made this comment about the Olympic athletes, and to some extent, you could make the case that surviving, into your late 80s, 90s to 100 in good health is essentially like an Olympic sport. It's like pushing human performance to the absolute limits of what the current genetics and biology will allow, sans new aging drugs. But Olympic athletes have this advantage that they have, trainers that watch every training session, that watch their performance, give them live feedback on everything they're doing, make sure they're optimizing the training benefit while not overtraining. They have nutritionists helping them to eat the right things to recover fully, and sports physicians helping them to, overcome injury. And to some extent, it would be great if we had a similar kind of support network to, aging to ripe old age in perfect health. And so I'm asking, given that I know that you also work on performance and wearable devices and AI tools in that context, whether you see a future where maybe this can be scaled, where, automated and sensors and maybe, like Fitbits rather than, research grade accelerometers can provide that sort of training, feedback, and support to aging adults, quite in the same way maybe that, an elite athlete would be given those sort of advice. And starting early, maybe in the 40s and 50s, you might end up in a much better state by the time you're 70, 80, 90.
No, I agree, and I definitely see merit for the wearables there. I think currently they're very good at sort of keeping track of your overall activity profile and your step count, but there is a lot more data there that can be used to, as a stumble meter or deviations in your balance. I think it's part of the answer there is indeed having better algorithms to assess the relevant quantities. The other part is about how do you use that information to convince people, because we know that being physically active is good for your health. Doesn't necessarily mean that people will start to do this. So you really have to also start this conversation with the individuals on what drives them, what's the reason for them to explore this. And it's actually a project that we're going to hopefully work on in future. Is one of the things that, at least in the national field, we are working towards a project on bioaging. And the question whether biological age might be a better motivator than simply weight loss or your step counts or whatever.
There's evidence that that's true for heart age, for instance, right? Like these metrics work as that.
Yeah, and the same might be for balance, because I think for balance is also an indicator that you're not doing well, at least biologically, relative to your age there.
Interesting. How close are the research sensors to like a Fitbit or Apple Watch? I mean, is what you're having orders of magnitude better at picking up stumbles, for instance, or is it a question of, pulling the data from, an Apple Watch and maybe producing a stumble app?
As a researcher, I'm inclined always to say that the research grade systems are better, but actually the commercial ones are getting to the stage where also for simple things like physical activity, they're pretty close. And of course, sometimes you want to have the data 3 decimals behind to be clear. But no, I think we're not that far away. And it's more getting those parties aboard to see the merit of. I mean, Apple has something like a fall detector and a stumble detector, but they're not really doing the job yet. And the biggest risk there is that there's a lot of false positives. So after a few times,
what you do with it, right?
turn it off, and then it loses its meaning. So it really is about this interplay between what is the user expecting and responding to versus what can you deliver from the hard data. And that's also why in our team, we have behavioral scientists that keep us grounded in, we can think of all sorts of things but, that work physically or physiologically, but if people don't adopt it, in the end, the knowledge becomes useless.
All right. I think we can take some questions from the audience. So let me introduce Janjira Sol. She is going to take questions from the audience and relay them. And so let's see what the audience wants to know.
Thank you, Professor Meijer, for the very interesting talk. So we have a number of questions from the audience. So the first question be from Jericho. So do balance tests like the MCT SIB, where multiple sensory motor inputs are systematically perturbed to target specific impairments to detect specific sensory integration deficits, do they actually show stronger sensitivity in detecting false risk?
I haven't made a full comparison between different balance scales on false as an outcome. I'm inclined to say yes, because typically, like the mini best, one of the reasons why we are interested in this one is it involves reactive balance and transitions as components, which are, at least that's what the epidemiological studies show, are important risk factors for falls. So I would expect them to be more sensitive. I don't have hard data to support this at the moment.
Thank you, Professor Meijer, for the response. And just a follow-up to the question that was just asked, have you tried using center of pressure data from balance or force plates during this balance test?
No, but the technology to do this is also emerging. So we are involved with a couple of private partners that develop printed electronics. So you can have inlays in your shoe where you can actually get to the monitoring of the center of pressure and estimates of center of mass during those balance tests. And I think that's also how these wearables should develop. So going from very controlled laboratory experiments and then jump to daily life, that's a really big leap, and you lose the connection. What we tend to do in those development tracks is that we first do very well-controlled laboratory experiments to test whether the wearable sensor actually measures the quantity that we're interested in, and then take the next step to more sort of directed routines. And these might be these balance tests that the physical therapist performs with the patient, because then at least you know the context in which the data is collected, and it makes the interpretation of the data a bit simpler before actually going into daily life and then test and monitor balance.
Got it. Thank you. So we have another question from Sanjay. So are there wearable sensors for fall risk assessment? And also just a side question to it. So before falling, people usually close their eyes and fall sideways. So is there any correlation with that?
So that's two questions. I think there is a lot of work ongoing in exploiting or using wearables for fall assessment. I think fall detectors are already well positioned and tend to work reasonably well. I think in terms of fall risk, there's people are exploring different locations. So people have looked at sensors located in your glasses to be near the vestibular system, because in the essence, you try to keep your head from the ground. So that's a good place to monitor. People use them on the lower back as sort of the position of the center of mass. People also use them in the watches, because if you tend to lose your balance, the first thing you do is you actually lift up your arms. And that's to manipulate the position of your center of mass, actually buying you yourself a few extra milliseconds before you fall. So I would say it's a field that's actively explored, but not with a final solution there yet. And then the second question.
So yeah, before falling, there might be a chance that people often close their eyes and fall sideways. So is there any correlation with that? Like, how they close their eyes, fall sideways, and
Yeah, I think even with trips and slips, people there's a famous study by Rubinovich who put up cameras in an elderly home, and they then recorded the falls. It turns out I think there are about 250 different scenarios in which people can fall, which is indeed tripping over something, but also being scared by something and then falling. So I'm not sure if closing the eyes and monitoring that would be of benefit, but it might be worth a try.
So we do have another question. So with the training, do you actually utilize vertical movement exercise such as climbing ladders, rock walls, so on and so forth?
No, currently we are mostly focusing on providing perturbations while someone is walking. So that means that the platform can go up and down, side to side, tilting. So it's the type of perturbations that you would experience while walking. I live in Maastricht. It's quite an old city, and we have these little cobblestones. They're really nice, but they're also creating this sort of wobbly platform, which is good for balance training. I think including those other activities like climbing definitely helps for strengthening your musculoskeletal system. So that would be a benefit. Not sure if it directly affects your balance performance in fall-related events, but it would be interesting to try.
Thank you for the response. So we have another question from the audience. So how is this training tailored for individuals with specific conditions like Parkinson's disease, stroke recovery, or dementia, which may also affect balance?
Yeah, very good question. As I mentioned, we have noticed that patients with neurological conditions adapt less. So maybe if one of our paradigms is that we have the dual belt situation. So persons walk on a treadmill with two belts and one belt accelerates. That's very effective in making someone trip. And a healthy adult, or at least an adult without any neurological deficits, will restore within 2 to 3 steps into their normal pattern again. If you have a sensory deficit or maybe a neurological condition, it might take up to 8 to 10 steps or even not recovering at all. If you then apply this repeatedly, you see that the young adults end up in a situation where they can recover in a single step. So they really improve their performance strongly, whereas the patients with neurological deficits take a lot longer and don't necessarily reach the same responses as the young adults. So I wouldn't say it's not effective, but it's not as effective as it is in community dwelling adults without any neurological deficits. And with dementia, of course, you have some other challenges that if we impose people to perturbations, the strongest effect is if people are not aware that they get perturbed. So it's really the shock, essentially, that somehow triggers a reactivation of that motor pattern. If you have people with cognitive decline, you can also ask ethical questions whether you really want to shock these people and if it's going to be effective at all. So I think currently we are focusing on community dwelling adults who are fall prone. And we are exploring patients with stroke and Parkinson's, but we don't have definite answers yet.
So thank you, Professor Meijer. Thank you, Janjira. Thank you, Shuping, and to the members of the team who've made tonight's seminar possible. And of course, thank you everybody for attending and asking questions. I would like to quickly highlight 2 different events that the center is organizing. So if you want to engage more deeply in conversations about aging, consider joining us on the 2025 Healthy Longevity Talent Incubator, which will take place in early July. If you join, you can look forward to 10 days of intense interactions and experiential learning about all aspects of aging. So it's a really fun event, so consider joining. And I'm particularly excited to mention briefly an upcoming conference. We have, following a really successful workshop at the ARDD last year, we have the first global conference on gerophysics. So that is the interaction between physics, dynamical systems, and the biology of aging. We have really fantastic lineup of speakers who will come from all over the world. The conference will be held 5th to 6th of March, 2025. And knowing who will attend, I'm sure it will be stimulating and really interesting. So if consider, attending. With that, I would just like to point out that next week's Healthy Longevity webinar will be on the 13th of February. The guest will be Aubrey de Grey, President and Chief Officer of the Life Extension Foundation, and always a great speaker. He will speak about breaking the pro-aging trance with robust mouse rejuvenation. So that should be interesting. So I hope to see you there, and I will leave you with some video of final thoughts about another application of AI in aging, which is related to drug design. So see you next week.
Aging is a biological process. We cannot delay death, but we can do something about aging.
This is Nir Barzilai, a groundbreaking researcher in the science of longevity.
When we cross the age of 60, we're starting to accumulate disease after disease and treatment after treatment for diseases that were not part of our evolution, right? People didn't die from dementia or from cardiovascular disease.
And here's the paradigm shift. Instead of curing each disease that comes with aging, why not cure aging itself and hence eliminate all those diseases? Imagine this lock is a disease. And imagine this key is the cure. Opening the lock means finding the right treatment. But here's the catch. You're not faced with just one key, but millions of them. You could be trying one key at a time. That's kind of what researchers have done up until now. Or you can predict which one is the right key using artificial intelligence.
The idea of utilizing a computer to aid the drug discovery process is not new. It's something that has been tried for many decades before.
But AI goes beyond automation. It predicts. It looks at good candidates, understands common features, and predicts other good candidates. But you could also take it a step further.
Imagine a new key from scratch with the desired properties. So you create a set of perfect keys that all of them fit the lock.
Some molecules discovered with AI have already entered clinical trials, and the field is attracting billions in investments. So it's clear that the approach is very promising.
I'm feeling like sunshine, like springtime, like something's in the water and I'm taking a deep dive. I'm feeling so weightless, like I'm gonna make it, and nothing in the universe can take this. I can see it clearly now, nothing gonna bring me down.